morning. Stacia and I wrote semi-serious bios since this is the first time that Stacia has been presenting to this group, and it's been a while since I have presented, and also, of course, no one's been presenting in person for the last year and a half. The downside of appearing in person, of course, is that the fluorescent lighting of the hotel room to show me exactly how gray my hair has gotten in the last year and a half, but whatever. So, this is my colleague, Stacia Sidlow. She's a deputy district attorney in the civil division of the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. She represents the Salt Lake County Health Department. She naively and unwittingly took that position 4 months before COVID-19 began. And she has been drinking from a fire hose ever since. Stacia was born and raised in Salt Lake City and never figured out a good reason to leave. She received her undergraduate degree in philosophy, which my dad always told me was the one thing I was not allowed to get a degree in. Philosophy from the University of Utah in 1998. After contemplating her belly button for 2 years, she decided to go to law school because food tastes good. After graduating from law school at the S.J. Quinney School of Law, in 2003, she spent most of her career as a law clerk and staff attorney at the United States District Court for the District of Utah, 2 short stints with District Judge Dale Kimball, and 1 incredibly long stint with Magistrate Judge Paul M. Warner, which is actually where Stacia and I met because I had a case with her with a crazy constitutionalist, which she will not tell. She remembered me, I'll just put it that way, years later when we came across each other again. She has a lot of funny and not so funny stories about judges and the inner workings of the court. If she's ever diagnosed with a terminal disease, she will write a tell-all book. Until then, though, her lips are sealed. Her 2 boys, Finn and Beck, are the light of her life and the bane of her existence. We all know what that's like parenting in the last little while, right? She still contemplates her belly button through meditation and mindfulness. She is becoming a certified mindfulness meditation teacher in case this whole lawyer thing doesn't work out. And she didn't add it here, but she also just officiated her first wedding a few weeks ago.
I'm a certified universal life minister, so if any of you are looking to get married or have, children who are looking to do so, look me up. I'm very cheap and lots of fun. And I turned 50 this year, so hence the readers. I'm very jealous that you don't have to do that.
Do you notice how far away from my face I was holding that piece of paper?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Darcy Goddard is the Chief Policy Advisor for the Civil Division of the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. Darcy has been with Salt Lake County for just shy of 10 years after a longish career as a wandering minstrel lawyer in private practice in Colorado and New York, then the New York Attorney General's office, and finally as the legal director at a local, not-for-profit, but for press, the ACLU of Utah. She is originally from Boise, Idaho, but went east for college at Smith College. Nope, not a girls' school, it's a women's college. This is not the facts of life. And she went to law school at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Then she sort of forgot to come back for like 19 years. Although her primary area of legal practice has always been litigation, she transitioned to her more policy-focused role in January 2016, when she began working with the Utah State Legislature. It was not an improvement. Darcy's favorite human is her 8-year-old Atticus. Yes, named after that Atticus, but that was before that Atticus was an unabashed racist in the sequel that shall not be named. Described variously by colleagues as, quote, a repentant ACLU lawyer, the nice one, the very mean one.
That one's the most common.
A First Amendment purist, the one who rappelled down a building dressed as a dragon just because her son asked. And wait, who's that? Right. Darcy loves to learn as much as she loves to teach. She is a frequent presenter for UCIP, UPC, and the District Attorney's Office.
So thank you very much for having us. Actually, I volunteered to do this because I happened to call Johnny on some proposed legislation right when he needed someone to fill this spot. So he's probably not as excited as he was claiming, but it's a really fun topic. First Amendment auditors. And I will say that when I say that phrase, put that in air quotes in your mind, because this is not a real First Amendment audit. These are some folks who might come to your place of business. We're going to show you some samples of some videos from Utah where they have done this. And they want to see how well you react to them of what their First Amendment rights are. So that can be a moving target, and it can be a little bit difficult to manage. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the legal framework, what these look like, and then in particular how you can yourself and how you can best advise your employees to deal with First Amendment auditors when they show up on your government properties.
Just off the bat, I'd like to know, any of you ever faced these First Amendment auditors if they come to your building? Okay, so you guys have some firsthand experience.
And based on those expressions, I'm guessing it was boss. All right. So because we're lawyers, we do just have to tell you that all of the views expressed in this, other than probably the quote of the First Amendment, are our views alone, and they do not represent the views of the District Attorney's Office, because lawyers are the worst. We have to say that. All right. So the First Amendment, I am in fact, and have been my whole life, a bit of a purist on the First Amendment. And I feel like it's one of the things that makes our country so different and unusual. And it's one of the things, actually one of the few things, that brought me to the ACLU, brought me out to Utah to be their legal director. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And the two aspects of this that come into play with First Amendment auditors are the freedom of speech, of course, and also the freedom of the press, because as media has evolved over the last decade or so, you've seen a rise in what are self-described citizen journalists. But those journalists are starting to get and are increasingly receiving the same protections from the courts that more traditional journalist sources have always had. And so those two concepts really dovetail here, and although we focus a lot on the freedom of speech aspect of it, keep in mind too that there's also a media component.
So the First Amendment only applies to the government. Private citizens are not subject to the First Amendment. Private companies are not subject to the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court has recognized several exceptions to bounds of the First Amendment. So basically not all speech is protected. Exceptions are obscenity, fighting words, defamation, child pornography, perjury, blackmail, incitement to imminent lawless action, true threats, solicitations to commit crimes, plagiarism of copyrighted materials.
And this is something a lot of people do misunderstand. You will see a lot of the times people would be like, Smith's Foods is violating my First Amendment rights. And unless Smith Foods has been taken over by the government, that's just not a thing. But the government can't do something that infringes on people's constitutional rights. So of course that includes all of us. And how many folks here are HR professionals? All right, wonderful. And how many folks here are attorneys? I know I saw a couple attorneys in the crowd. All right, great. You'll see some dovetail here because you probably heard some of your employees complaining over times about restrictions that you can place on their speech as government employees. That is a different concept that we're not getting into here, but it's something that sometimes permeates in the back of this, especially as people are trying to respond to the First Amendment auditors. And we can talk about that as the presentation goes forward. So we might not like all free speech, and I got to tell you, like in the last 5 years, I feel like a lot of really, on all sides of the spectrum, a whole lot of very outrageous speech has promulgated. We may not like it, but the fact that it's so highly revered in the American political discourse is one of the things that really does make the United States different, and in my personal view as the First Amendment advocate, better than a lot of other countries. And this is a quote from Benjamin Franklin: "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freedom of speech." And that's in part because one of the ways that we as a country stay free from government tyranny is the ability to speak out against it. And we're going to go through these next slides super fast, but I just wanted to give you a contrast because I think sometimes the First Amendment gets a bad rap because it feels like it's always protecting speech that you're like, why on earth is someone allowed to say that? It's the kind of speech sometimes, like in the high school kid cases, you're like, if that were my kid who said that kid would be grounded forever, but it's protected speech. So just really quickly, also began jailing people for ironic comments, which included the posting of political satire on Facebook and similar social media accounts. So imagine if we were a country that would jail you for what you say on Facebook. That's, I think, something that we can all agree.
We'd all be jailed.
We would probably all be jailed, unless, of course, cat memes became protected political speech, which I suppose is possible. Right, totally. Stacia actually has a hairless cat, and every time I look at it on Facebook, he just makes me giggle. But he's adorable. So Hong Kong, how do we compare to Hong Kong? Here's another example. People were jailed for trying to approach a politician and talk to that politician about their grievances. They were also jailed for hanging a banner across a river in a place where that politician could see it. And that is something that, again, I think that all of us would say, like, that's preposterous. But that's the kind of thing that happens in countries that doesn't have something akin to the First Amendment. The last example is Russia, because, you always have to work Russia into a silly presentation in Utah. But Russia is a company that too sends people to prison for liking things on social media. Like, you like that picture of Idris Elba, which I'm going to say a lot of us in this room would. If that's something that the state says is unacceptable, you can go to prison for that in Russia.
For 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lengthy amount of time for doing something that they're not. So.
Right. So.
I have one more example.
Yes.
It's sort of recent.
Okay.
So I'm sure some of you have heard about the takeover in Hong Kong of the Apple. It's like, I don't know the name of it, but it's basically a pro-democracy newspaper. In June, they went in and seized basically all the computers, froze their assets, all of that. I know there's kind of a crackdown going on in Hong Kong right now, but it just really brings home the fact that we have something very special in this country that so many other countries don't have. And so in recognizing that, yes, we're having to deal with these First Amendment auditors and they bother us, they're doing it because they hold true to the First Amendment, or want to.
Or at least their view of what the First Amendment is.
Yes.
Which, again, is maybe not always true. So this was just actually a funny clip that probably wasn't even that funny, but it also appears that it's not working. So what does that mean to me? It was actually a clip from, that is definitely not it. That was not it. Is this Careless Whisper? Never mind, it wasn't that funny. It was just a clip from the Facts of Life.
This is going to happen for all of us, and some of these clips we need.
Yes, so we do definitely.
Okay, so.
It was just a funny clip of the Facts of Life, just because I was thinking of the Facts of Life, and I figured this might be the only group that might still remember the Facts of Life. We could sing it. It would be very embarrassing for literally everyone, including perhaps most especially you all, but it would be cringy. All right, so we definitely don't need to see All right. So also, what does that mean to you? First Amendment audits. So these are some screenshots from some First Amendment audits that are posted online. Cops-plaining fail, First Amendment audit. Some very close, heated arguments between government employees. This nice man who appears to just be trying to explain something in a government lobby. And then several folks at a police station doing what they thought was a First Amendment audit when they went in to go retrieve some materials.
So this next one, so this guy, Mr. Reyes, Sean Paul Reyes, said that he raked in $8,000 in his first month as an auditor.
$8,000. He was laid off from his warehouse job.
These
and he
people
did this
make
instead.
money. They really make money. And right now, his YouTube channel has 44,000 subscribers. So he's getting clicks, he's getting likes.
His most recent audit, wait, there's money in this? There's always money in everything. His most recent audit came in June. This was also a video that I'm not
showing.
There we go. So his most recent audit came on June 12th of last year. He began filming at a public library. Does anyone here work with a library? Yes, and you know there are very special protections that attend to libraries, in part because what you choose to read is also considered an aspect of free speech. So he decided to take it to the limit, or up to 11, as some of us who maybe remember this is Spinal Tap would think. So he decided to film inside a public library. It's a 21-second clip, so this isn't a big deal. But he got more than 17,000 views on it. He got sponsorships. He gets money for that. And then he also, some of these you'll see in the next clip. This is the entirety of what happened, but this is kind of an example of how not to handle maybe a First Amendment auditor. Stacey's the only one who can make the videos go. I'm a moron. I haven't had enough coffee, I think. No, this is what you would want to caution your employees is a way to escalate the situation and make it a lot worse. So this is sort of the don't. I think we exited it for a second.
Technology.
But there is a beautiful scene on the screen for you. Well, no, it's not. Never mind. For us, we can see like a really pretty picture. Okay, gotcha. Okay, again, this is a don't.
See what I'm doing there? Acting like child. Come on, dude. Don't touch me. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say? Constitutionally protected activity. It's constitutionally protected activity. If I went in there and I was acting like an asshole, you're wrong. Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
So that resulted in an internal affairs investigation of the officer that was involved. It also resulted in some criminal charges against the First Amendment auditor. And I don't know how that all turned out because it hasn't gone forward yet in court. But that is one where, again, escalating it with the close personal conduct and trying to argue with them over whether they're right or wrong on his interpretation of the Constitution is exactly what he's looking for. And that's why this video, is one of the reasons this video got so many clicks and likes and he earned so much money off of it, was because of the way that the law enforcement officers responded.
Which brings us to Jason Gutterman. He's an East Hampton resident and he uses the moniker Amagansett Press. I think he's probably one of the most popular ones. He's got 276,000 subscribers to his channel. He has been in Utah several times. That's because of some of that. He also, after an audit at a postal office in Colorado, because the officers didn't handle it in exactly the right way, they ended up settling. Well, there's some argument about that, but they ended up settling with him for $9,500, and so another paycheck for him.
And so his YouTube channel, which please don't go to, because unfortunately I've had to watch so many of his videos, and so has Stacia, that we've probably just earned him more money in the last several months. But it's Am Against the Press. His son also is in the family business of First Amendment audits, and he goes under the Watchman, they reportedly make as much as $30,000 a month just from sponsorships and clicks on YouTube based on their confrontational interactions with the government.
Although in one of his videos, he was asked specifically about whether or not he makes money from it, and he was like, oh no, I just do this is a public service, I don't make any money, I pay for my own hotel and travel expenses and blah, 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 blah. And that's just an outright lie, so.
Well, he may actually pay for his travel expenses out of pocket. I guess I don't know, but he certainly is being reimbursed by the viewing public one way or another. So, but now we're going to show you some clips of Mr. Gutterman in action. And this was down in Provo, and I think you probably have to exit speaker view again, right, in order to play it. All right. And my favorite part of this video is probably the very beginning, because he refers to himself as the Johnny Appleseed of the First Amendment. And if one of his apple seeds of truth takes root, he will consider his life a success. And I just love that because it's so absurd. There we go.
Johnny Appleseed of the First Amendment. Okay. So if one of my seeds that I plant grows out of 1,000, I'm a happy man. How are we doing? Can I turn off the camera? Yeah. Absolutely not. Can you please go away? I was in the middle of a nice conversation. What do you mean turn off my camera? That's a weird way to... Do you work here? So you walk up and say, hi, my name is Jane. I'm the Public Information Support Officer here. Whatever your position is.
Well, thank you for telling me how to behave.
Well, it sounds like somebody needs to tell you how to behave.
Okay, so that's an intro, and we're going to show you a few more specific parts of this video. But as you can see, he's pretty confrontational. You guys who had one of these guys visit you, is that kind of representative of how it went with you? Okay. And this was him going to the Provo Health Department, and it was during the height of COVID, and the public information officer was concerned that people would feel like they couldn't come in and be vaccinated or couldn't come in to be tested if someone was standing outside and filming them, given some of the stigma surrounding COVID, especially in the beginning. So she was just trying, and I'm not, yes I am, I'm going to say she was right. She was right. I was going to be non-judgmental, but I refused because she was right. Like she wanted to be protecting her place of business and the people who needed to come there for necessary medical care. How she approached it is something that we can talk about, because certainly the way she approached it ended up escalating the situation. I don't think you can blame her for feeling some real heightened concerns in those circumstances. Another thing to know about these guys, and this isn't a statement at all about guns, they often come with very visible firearms, one or two each, and then they film carrying those firearms, and that's also part of what they do. Part of it is they want to see how you respond to the Second Amendment concerns. That's not their main bread and butter, but it is something to keep in mind. So you have someone who won't identify himself, who is armed, and who is filming your facility, and that causes some real alarm. Your guys had it in the first instance, so I don't know, did it alarm you?
It's just like they came in, they were videoing, and just like super abrasive. Like, we can be here and we can video you, and like, what do you even say to that? Okay, I'm just gonna keep working. Like,
Actually, that's the right answer.
Yes.
We'll get to that later.
Yes. All right, so let's go back to, I want to say,
Here?
so he just kind of wanders around a little bit.
Tents with the National Guard.
Yeah, I don't see a National Guard tent. Looks like,
Here we go.
that's pretty rough.
Security officer.
Yeah, I wonder how just that is. Yeah.
Well, they have to waive, because there's statutory limit, they have to have a speeding trial, so they'd have to waive it.
Right.
And their attorney's been pretty well with the court.
And then what happens?
But the last I heard that we're going to try to get those up in the next week or so, start doing jury trials.
Gotcha.
They'll separate the jury and do stuff like that, but they've got to get that going again, so.
And what if,
We don't get very many jury trials in justice court with these are misdemeanors, I can't remember.
how we doing?
So here's the whole interaction.
Can I turn off the camera?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Can I help you?
Can you please go away? I was in the middle of a nice conversation. We need to turn off my camera. That's a weird way to.
I'm not trying to be.
Do you work here? So you walk up and say, hi, my name is Jane. I'm the public information support officer here, whatever your position is.
Thank you for telling me how to behave. Thank you for.
Well, it sounds like somebody needs to tell you how to behave. When you just walk up to somebody on a sidewalk and say, stop recording, turn your cameras off, that's a little ridiculous, don't you think?
Well, what is your purpose here today?
Well, you should have started with that. So I'm going to go back to my cordial conversation with the Deputy Evans here, and he'll handle it. You're safe. You go back to work. You're okay. Learn how to be a little more, if you're going to be a public information person, you should be a little more congenial with the public. What do you think? I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. So I'm just going to go back to my conversation. So, where are we? Deputy Evans.
Maybe we can just say, Carrie, thank you.
Yeah, you go back to work.
I know.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll really hear any explanations. I'm good, thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Sidlow, off you go. Carry on. Fair thought. Carry on. So you can see what I do is,
One thing I want to point out with her, because she's working for the health department, she has to take HIPAA into consideration. That's something that I've actually faced in my job. We had a couple of auditors come to one of our health clinics, and that was the first time I had ever heard of these people. And I think our employees handled it pretty well, but we have to kind of figure out like the considerations between HIPAA and the First Amendment. Can they come in and film in the lobby area? Well, yeah, sort of, but we also have to make reasonable efforts to protect the privacy of our patients. And so that's really kind of a difficult one, and haven't totally figured out what we're going to do.
Well, and the up or down side was that there's another one of these videos, and it's not one that I included here. I don't know if you've seen it, but he is outside a Veterans Administration clinic, also in Utah, and he gets into a huge argument with the person who's just trying to talk to him over what HIPAA protects and what it doesn't protect. And he points out that the facility itself is not HIPAA, and it's not protected health information for you to going in and out of a facility necessarily. And they're just trying to say to him, we're just trying to be sensitive to these issues. And these are veterans, for goodness sake. So, I mean, of all the people you would think that somebody who was like, I support the First Amendment and I heart America would want to be protecting, you would think it would be veterans, not so much. And so it's just this huge fight that he has with people over HIPAA itself and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. And it's kind of a nice example of how sometimes it just doesn't help to try to engage him on what he believes to be the law. Or these guys, because they just, he was not interested in learning the nuances of HIPAA, shockingly. The one thing I will tell you as we pull up the next example, he just released a video a week ago, which I had the fortune to watch just yesterday. And he is announcing to all of his followers that he is going on a 6,000 mile, 17-state tour of the United States to do these audits. He's relocated to Colorado, so you can definitely expect to see him in all parts of Utah because he definitely likes to come here. But he's definitely ramping up his efforts to get new subscribers and new sponsorships, and it's a big deal. And like you said, it's
so if that's not available, we can certainly work with whatever you got.
No, like I said, we're just trying to protect the privacy is all we're trying to do.
all right. So here's some examples of another audit. And again, I'm just gonna stop using air quotes, but I need them, and my card recognizes that I need them.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is him in the Salt Lake City.
I didn't hear you. Yeah, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. No, we're fine. Thank you. Appreciate that.
this part, where he sort of is almost looking into someone's coding, rather than working on it with a computer. We'll see it in a second. To me, he got too close to a private office here, and I probably would have told him that he needed to back off. But then he continues on his merry way.
Might I just ask what your name is and what services are provided here in this office?
It's different when we have budget and stuff like that, cashiering and.
Yes, all business licensing,
Yeah.
treasurer.
Yeah.
So like tax payments and that kind of thing collected here, or that's
Just all different.
all different
You're not
things?
recording me.
I am, yeah.
Okay, I don't want to be.
Very obviously.
Right, I don't want to be recorded.
Well, we're public.
I know.
And you're a public employee. And so I'm just coming in, documenting my interactions with the public.
Oh, okay, yeah,
All right, so that's all you can tell us?
yeah, I actually have someone waiting.
Oh, okay.
I just need to help them, sorry.
All right, well, you had asked me if I needed any help when I came in, so I thought I was first, but I guess I'm last. So, okay, you have a good day. Thank you, appreciate it. I think she asked me if I needed help when we came in, right? I don't know. Maybe not. Hello. No, we're just here.
So,
Hello. How are you?
So, as you can see, he's very collegial. He comes in, she asks if he needs help, he says no, and then when he comes and decides he wants to interact with her and says she doesn't want to be filmed, he decides he does want help, she's moved on to someone else, and then he makes snide comments about it, presumably to try to get a reaction from her or to impress him in public. That is not uncommon with these, and she was great. She just ignored it, and he moved along, and she helped the next client. So good for her. Like, that was a very calm, it was a really calm reaction to a really uncomfortable circumstance. This next example, he wanders into what isn't a public area of the building, so security gets called.
So this is the accounting office?
It is.
Cool. So we're just looking around the building.
Oh,
Can I ask what your name is and what you do here?
are you guys touring, are you guys on the tour, or?
No, I'm not on a tour. We just actually have never been in Salt Lake City before, and we're just checking out your building.
Yeah, this is the finance office.
Okay. So you don't want to tell me your name and what you do?
No, but I'm gonna call security.
Why would you do that? Call security. Why would you do that?
And that's what he wants. He wants security.
I don't walk around with cameras that are off, generally.
That's going to get all the attention.
Well, why do you want to call security, though? That's interesting. Because I asked your name?
I'm curious of why they're filming.
Oh, so then ask me why I'm filming. Instead of saying I'm going to call security, right? I want to tell you exactly why I'm filming. What we do is, have you ever heard of a First Amendment audit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so that's what we're doing.
Okay, well, this is the place to come to for our First Amendment audit. You need to go up someplace that's got more authority. Because we
No, I don't need to go anywhere that's got authority. I just, what we do is we go to, you told me you know what a First Amendment audit is.
I know what an audit is.
You know what an audit is, but we're talking about specifically a First Amendment audit. So what we do is we go to any publicly accessible areas. We stay out of restricted areas. We make very sure we don't cross that line. And we just look around the building, try to introduce ourselves to folks and shake hands and say hello and see how everybody's doing and see how things are going. Good.
But we kind of are a little bit restricted.
Because we are the finance department.
Restricted as far as what?
We handle all the checks. So we kind of.
Well, you don't have checks laying out in open view.
No, but we would have working with them, we would.
Okay. Got that.
So.
Well, here's security.
Ask them, shall we see?
Oh, I didn't ask. We already met. Ma'am.
So, someone, this woman in the green shirt tries
Oh,
to get a
yeah.
better
Yeah, no, we just actually came in. I asked, young lady asked me if I need any help. So I said to her, yeah, matter of fact, can you tell me what your name is and what you do here? And she said, no, I'm not going to tell you my name. Maybe I'd call security for you. So that's the conversation we were having when you walked in.
We just got
Are very firm supporters of the Constitution of the United States. That's what we're...
So, this is, so he wanders on his way. Security does not try to take him away, does not try to trespass him, but they do call the city attorney's office because the city attorney happens to be housed in that building. And the city attorney and their First Amendment expert, Boyd Ferguson, come out and just try to sort of be like, what you doing? They have to try to have a conversation with him about where he's allowed and where he's not allowed, and they come to an agreement that he's allowed in the public areas of the building, and he can film into things that he can see from public areas so long as he's not disrupting the conduct of business, which is definitely the safest course if it's something that you are familiar with. It's the safest course for First Amendment purposes. He nonetheless, you will see how calm this interaction is. He nonetheless chooses as the cover photo, the still shot of this, the attorney like this, which by the way, he's like pointing to a specifically cool part of the building. But he like, this is the still shot, and then the title of it is City Attorney School, First Amendment Audit. So even when you try to engage with them in a productive way, recognizing their interest in the First Amendment, they are still going to try to take it out of context because, again, that's how they make the money. So this, if you want to interact with them, that's great. I'm not sure it's going to be terribly fruitful to say anything more than, you know, nice to see you, continue on your way. But we're going to give you some tips for how to deal with them in a sec.
Firm supporters of the Constitution of the United States. That's what we were just having a conversation about. And in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, the Constitution's really taking a beating these days. And that's a scary thing. So, in order to express our rights and exercise our rights, we've chosen the First Amendment as our venue. So what we do is we go into publicly accessible areas of public buildings, whether it's jails, FBI buildings, courthouses, municipal buildings, that kind of thing. And we go in and we film and take pictures in public areas, and we're very careful not to go into restricted areas, and see what kind of reaction we get. And if we get a good reaction, that's excellent, that's the goal, that's what we're hoping for. We shake hands, we meet some nice folks like yourselves, carry on with our lives, and go on to the next spot. If we meet some difficulty along the way, we hope that we can maybe shed a little light in some microscopic way on what's going on, what we stand for, and what we're trying to accomplish. They go on YouTube.
So is this a commercial kind of thing? You get money?
No, it's not commercial.
Because
No.
we do have an ordinance that says it's sort of, because we had people like to do movies.
It's a public service.
Building.
No.
And if it's a commercial thing, there's a video.
No, I don't charge anybody for my videos. We do this all out of pocket. I pay for my own hotels and gas and travel expenses.
This building is not a traditional public forum for free speech purposes.
It's not a traditional public forum.
Only parks, streets, and sidewalks are the only traditional public forums under the law.
Under which, federal law or Utah law?
United States Supreme Court. Over and over.
So what you're telling me is that in, okay,
Then there's something called a designated public forum.
okay,
And that's where the government opens a building to speech purposes generally, in which case it's treated just like read going.
it's on. Could we be any more obvious about it?
Okay.
Isn't there a red flashing light on the front of this thing? Yeah, there is.
So that turns something that otherwise would be a public forum into a public forum. And this building has not been turned into a traditional public forum, except maybe the first floor for public purposes. We've had some public displays of art down there. And then there's a third thing that's not a public forum at all. So our police station, for example.
Well,
Okay, so he tried to have a conversation about what the First Amendment protects, what it doesn't protect, and what areas of the building might be considered a forum where all free speech is protected and allowed. And as you can see, it did not seem to resonate with him. And I do love it though when he's like, what law? The state constitution, the federal constitution? And I feel like he should know that the First Amendment is in the federal constitution.
He's a self-professed expert on the First Amendment, so you'd think.
You'd think, but anyway. So, you know, that is just an example. So, Stacia, before we move on to sort of the legal part of this for you guys, Stacia was going to talk a little bit about what was good and what was bad and what some tips might be for interacting with these guys.
Want me to do that now or at the end?
Yeah, how about a little bit now, maybe some videos and then again at the end?
So basically, I mean, these people are going to come to your work area very likely. And so the best way to sort of handle it is, one, have a plan. Educate your employees. Know what you're going to do before it even happens, so that when it does, you're not kind of back on your heels. Because they're working with the element of surprise. They're coming in, they want you back on your heels. They want you to do it because that's how they get clicks and likes. So the best thing to do is really remain calm, have an understanding what is, and we can talk more about this as we talk about forum, but designate what is sort of, you know, the limited, designated public forum, which would usually be like lobby areas, but anything that's, you know, private office areas, cubicles, that kind of thing, unless somebody that traditionally would be invited back, employees only, and then guests that are invited back. Those are non-public, so they don't have a right to go back there. But mostly, like the thing I really want to drive home is that it kind of, it's what you do. It's the first encounter with them. It's the first thing out of your mouth when they approach you that's going to sort of set the tenor for the entire encounter. So the more that you can really remain calm and don't let them get to you. Do some deep breathing. I'll teach you some meditation if you want. So those are some of the tips.
So you did hear the attorney. Hold on. Where's Alan?
Sorry, right here.
No, sorry. Got it. I got it.
We're good? Okay.
I wanted to see the actual slide as opposed to our ugly school. Yay! All right. So what's a forum? What is he talking about? A forum. There are really three kinds of forums. Some people would argue for. Three kinds of forums. Not all government property is treated as a public forum just because it happens to be owned by the government. And that case law is clear. And that's the case law that Boyd was referring to when he was saying like this part of our building is not a traditional public forum. And there is a case that we'll talk about in a second that is specifically on point when it comes to government property. And the Supreme Court of the United States says very clearly, property doesn't become public in the First Amendment sense just because it's owned by the government. There has to be more than that. So the kinds of forum that we're going to talk about, traditional public forums, limited or designated public forums, and then non-public forums. And still other government property isn't considered a forum at all. So like your private office is not a forum. You're not opening it up for people to come in and pontificate about how they feel about, I don't know, local zoning ordinance, unless that's your job. So that's something that wouldn't be considered a forum in any event. Then you have like the traditional categories of speech. A public forum is the sort of most revered, most respected aspect for the First Amendment purposes. And that is like sidewalks, public parks, the area outside your government building, and that is what receives the most protection under the First Amendment. Any regulation in those areas of speech is subject to what is called strict scrutiny. And in order to regulate in that area, you have to show a compelling state interest and that what you're doing is narrowly tailored. So what that basically turns out to be is that you can enact what are known as reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions for those areas. But other than that, you're basically not going to be able to do it. And reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. So if you have a public park, you can say, for example, no protests with megaphones after 10 p.m. That would be one that unless you were targeting a specific group and they had a reason they needed to be having that protest with a megaphone after 10 p.m. And we've heard a lot of arguments about that over my time at the county and certainly my time at the ACLU. But that is something where you would probably be fine. There's a very good reason why you don't want the neighbors disturbed by megaphone protests at 11 p.m. when they're all trying to get to sleep. The 1939 decision from the Supreme Court sort of sets forth a general overarching principle. Wherever the title of streets and parks may rest, they have immemorially been held in trust for the use of the public. In time of life, they have been used for purposes of assembly, communicating thoughts between citizens, and discussing public questions. But again, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions are generally okay. Two caveats to that. They have to be both content neutral and they have to be viewpoint neutral. And that's a really interesting distinction for the attorneys in here. You probably remember this from law school, or perhaps you have litigated it more recently. I used to do a lot of First Amendment work when I was in private practice, and I did a lot of amicus work and work for the State University of New York system. And this was like the most fascinating area. So content neutral means, for example, you can't say, we will allow speech outside of our building unless it's political speech. Political speech, we will not allow, because that is based on the content of what the speaker is saying. Make sense? You also couldn't say, for example, we will allow protests, we will not allow protests using megaphones in the public park after 10 p.m. unless it's a protest by the Green Party on a specific issue. That is also not going to be content neutral. I don't know what the Green Party would be doing it. I mean, I don't even know if there is a Green Party necessarily in Utah. But then, for viewpoint neutral, that's considered the most insidious form of First Amendment violation. And that is where you say, oh, we'll allow political speech, but we are not going to allow the libertarians to speak. The Democrats, such as they are, the Republicans, the Independent Party, all of those guys are fine, but libertarians, forget it, they can't be here. That is considered, the Supreme Court is very clear, that is the most insidious of all restrictions that government can enact. And Johnny's looking at us because he knows that we're running out of time. Okay.
Okay, so the next one is a limited or designated public forum, and that's really kind of what we're talking about with the public areas in public buildings, like the lobby areas. Arguably, those would be a limited or designated public forum.
And once you have a limited or designated forum, you do have to allow the speech to happen that is intended for that forum. So you can say, for example, council chambers or commission chambers. I guess in most of, I think of it as council because we are the council, but commission chambers. That is where you can speak to commission matters. But you can't come in and just read 10 minutes of your favorite recipes, because that's not what that forum is for, right? And that's, I mean, I suppose that's kind of content-y. But what you're doing there is saying it's a reasonable restriction because this is designated for the conduct of the commission business, and it's a reasonable restriction on time. And that's why you see, for example, sometimes you say you have to speak to items on the agenda when the public comes in, or you're limited to 2 minutes. Those are the kind of things that you can do within a designated public forum to make it, to put some reasonable restrictions on speech. Non-public forums are tricky. Non-public forums, though, some would argue they're the inside of your building that is not where the public is just allowed to go. I would argue, I would probably at least try to argue that some of those are not a forum at all, like your private office. But definitely it's a non-public forum. That's hard to know sometimes. For example, the Supreme Court has said that the sidewalks surrounding the Supreme Court building are a public forum. The sidewalks surrounding U.S. Post Office, not a public forum. So one is a public forum, one is non-public, and it all depends on the specific facts and circumstances of the case. But that's the case involving the post office, where the Supreme Court made it very clear that just because it's a government building, or even a sidewalk around a government building, doesn't necessarily mean that it is open to the public in the sense of the traditional public forum.
So what does that mean in practice? As the Supreme Court said in Coquina, the government's ownership of property does not automatically open that property to the public. That's a really good thing to remember. Government has greater power to regulate expression when it acts as a proprietor controlling its internal operations than it does as a sovereign lawmaker. That's kind of what we're talking about. Think of it as you're a proprietor. This means that the government officials can limit protests inside a courthouse because the government has important operations to conduct. It must be able to control its operations to carry out its functions.
What that means for you all, though, again, the devil's in the detail, right? And Stacia and I both independently over the last year have tried to find a case law on this specific topic of regulations on First Amendment auditors coming into government buildings. I have found one case that is specifically on point, and it is very fact-specific. But we would certainly argue that government buildings are at most a limited public forum. The rules in a limited public forum have to be reasonable and viewpoint neutral. And if your argument is that you've opened it up for doing the government's business and for government employees to do the government's work, then reasonable measures likely can be taken to make sure that both of those things can happen. But the mere fact that they're filming you is usually not considered a sufficient enough disruption in order for you to argue that they should be trespassed because you're unable to do your work. They would have to be actually being disruptive in a way that is more than just the filming.
That it's actually interfering with your ability to get your job done.
So if they're in like the public area of your building, and let's say you have a clerk's office and you have a small area up here and then you have the clerk's windows, right? Like at least ours is set up that way. If there were 4 of them that were taking up that whole space and so the public was having trouble getting in, you would have an argument that they are impeding the government's business. You could certainly ask them to back up, make room for customers. That would be a tough call to say that they had to leave, however. So the one case I found that is on point was actually a city that enacted an ordinance that made it illegal to film a government employee inside the city hall if they've asked you to stop. And it was expressly set up to limit First Amendment auditors. And they did this because in the past, First Amendment auditors had come into that building, they had filmed employees, they had posted them online, and those employees had gotten death threats. And yes, that happens. Hopefully it didn't happen to you guys. But they got death threats, and they had a documented history of that happening in this building. So they adopted that ordinance. The court found, well, the parties stipulated that it's legal to film public employees, that you have to allow public employees to be filmed. I'm not sure that that was a great stipulation on behalf of the government. The case law is really clear that you have a right to film law enforcement officers when they are in public doing their duties. That's clearly established. I have not found a single case anywhere in the country that said specifically that that right extends as a First Amendment right to filming all government employees, including people who are in their offices doing their jobs. But in any event, the parties in that case just agreed that that was a non-issue. So the court didn't have to decide that. They also agreed that it was a limited public forum. And I'm not sure that was a great argument either, that was a great stipulation by the government either. I think you'd at least want to explore whether you could argue that it's a non-public forum once they're outside of the actual physical public areas there. But that's where they were. The court actually found that that regulation was constitutional, was reasonable, but relied very heavily on the record of past interruptions in business and the death threats to the employees. So I don't know how persuasive that's going to be if you haven't had that kind of factual record to back it up if you want to adopt an ordinance or a policy like this. The court also found, and I found this really interesting as someone who really cares about the First Amendment, in particular viewpoint neutrality law, the court also found that it was viewpoint neutral. And the argument from the gentleman who was trespassed out of the building and given a ticket was, but what you're doing is effectively allowing individual employees to censor speech they don't like. And that's because he could come up and he could film you, and if you were fine with that, if it was KUTV News, you could be like, great, you can film me. But if you don't like him, because he's somebody who's up in your face lecturing you about HIPAA, then you could say, stop, and you are cutting off his ability to film you in that circumstance. And it was I thought that was a really interesting question, because it does allow basically veto power in each individual employee. The court didn't go into great detail on why she found that to be viewpoint neutral. She did say, however, that she felt like it should just be left to the individual employee discretion. And again, I think she was relying, without saying it, she was implicitly relying on the factual record of the previous disruptions in business. That said, he originally pounded the table, got national press, and earned some money from it, saying he was going to appeal that decision. He then dropped the appeal, and so it was never appealed, and it's one case out of the Middle District of Florida with no persuasive value literally anywhere else, but it's the only one I found. So it was just a really interesting idea. The last time I gave this presentation to the county treasurers was really interesting. They also asked whether if you wanted to restrict filming in a government building, you could say all filming is prohibited, period. It's questionable whether you could do that. But if you did do that, you couldn't allow KUTV in. So all of your electeds who want to give interviews standing outside their offices, you would have to say they couldn't do that either. So there's a downside to even trying that. And you certainly couldn't say some kind of filming is allowed and other filming isn't allowed, because then you're going to get into the thicket of what is content neutral and what is viewpoint neutral. But some smaller things, like Stacia mentioned, she's going to talk through a little bit more. A simple act of just putting up a sign that says employees only behind the desk is a great thing. There's a section of the video with Salt Lake City, if you guys want to go back and watch it, where he tries to go into a room and an employee says, this is employees only. He said, where's the sign? And she's like, this door is usually closed. And she just very politely backs him right out of that space and closes the door. She's great. She's really good at it. But if you have areas like that, put up some signage. That is something that can definitely provide you some measure of protection.
And, you know, like I said before, really just being prepared. That is probably the most important thing, because when they do come, and they probably will, you know what to do. And I know it can feel really aggressive and invasive when somebody's got a camera in your face, you don't know what they're going to do with it. You know, you don't want to escalate it, but they're probing you. They are trying to provoke a confrontation. They're trying to get you to respond in some way or do something that's going to get them more likes or just more views. I mean, one of the things is that they're really looking for people, for their viewing public to be outraged. And it could be people who are, you know, sort of supportive of the employees that are having to go through that. And they're outraged that these First Amendment auditors are going into buildings and doing this. But they're clicking on it, they're watching it. Or it could be, you know, the people that are totally supportive of First Amendment auditors, and they get outraged by how the auditors are being treated. So the biggest thing is not give them content. Try not to give them content. If you are just totally boring and don't do anything outrageous and don't fight with them and treat them very cordially and pleasantly and professionally, that's going to go a long way. It's going to take money out of their pockets, and ultimately that's why they're doing this.
All right, so as is frequently the case with First Amendment presentations, we actually haven't provided you with any answers, and I'm really sorry about that. There are very few things that are just concrete with the First Amendment. It's all subject to debate, which again is protected by the First Amendment, which is why it is very circular but also awesome. So we wanted to give you a chance to ask us some questions. We went a little bit over, we started late. I know that we don't want to get Johnny off his game for the rest of the day, but if you guys have questions, we're happy to try to answer them, or you can always email either Stacia or me. Johnny has our contact information, and we would be happy to talk through any of these issues with anyone. As you can tell, we kind of love this topic.
But I didn't know about it until the first of this year. I had no idea this was even a thing, and I went down the rabbit hole. Very concerned that we were going to have some of these people coming to our vaccination sites. So, trying to advise my client, what do you do?
All right, any questions, concerns? All right, well, thank you guys so much.